Welcome back. Did you find something that works, or did you at least have some fun trying to find something that works? I glossed over this a little bit here, but if you load the website, then the initial pattern that you see is actually quite interesting to start with. Let's have a look at this together. So this here is the pattern that you see, and if I start this, as I'm sure you did, you kind of see that this starts to move across the screen here, and it looks like it's just going to keep moving because we always have the same number of alive pixels here, and then some of them die and some of them are freshly created, and this kind of creates this impression of motion here, and this seems to be going on forever, right? This just keeps moving, which in itself is already a little bit interesting. It turns out that this is actually one of the most famous patterns in the game of life, called a slider. If you click at the lexicon here, you will have seen that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of these patterns. Let me go to the tab where I opened the glider before. So this is the first of the so-called group of spaceships that was discovered. There's kind of these things that look a little bit like weird spaceships, but in particular they move across the screen, as you saw with this particular glider pattern here. And this was actually found in 1970, so in the same year that Conway's Game of Life was proposed. And interesting pattern in the sense that it moves across the screen as we saw, so it doesn't reach a stable state, it doesn't die out, it doesn't kind of oscillate between two different parts as we have seen before, it just keeps moving. So and of course you can, let me reset this here, you can then experiment with this. There are variations of these, and if you go back to the lexicon, you can see that there are various variants of this glider patterns, like larger gliders. We can even have patterns that produce these gliders, or as in this case here, something that is not quite as exciting, so kind of moves around and then eventually I think it reaches a stable state. Let me see. This actually brings us to the other problem here that I wanted you to discover with this. It's really quite hard to figure out what a particular starting pattern is going to do. Let me stop this here. As you can see, this essentially resulted in this stable block of 4 live cells, and everything around moved around a little bit and then died out. Now, figuring this out, let me reset this, from this initial pattern is really quite difficult, right? So there's not a particular kind of shape or a particular number of pixels or anything like that where you can with confidence say that this is what's going to happen once we get past a certain complexity threshold. So certainly if I start with my 2x2 block, then yeah, okay, it's pretty straightforward to figure out that nothing is going to happen there and this will just remain where it's at. But if I have something more complex like this one here, it's not obvious what's going to happen. So even if I make a minor change here, let's say I add one more live pixel, what's going to happen when I click start? Will this result in the same end state where I have this stable block of 2x2 live pixels and nothing around it? Probably not, right? Let's have a look, and I don't know myself. I kind of have to try this out, right? Okay, so it moves around similar to what we've seen before. Okay, we get one stable block. Oh no, wait, it's gone. Kind of have an expanding pattern here. There's a bunch of stable 2x2 blocks now, except one of them just disappeared again, and there's another one, and there's a bunch of stable patterns. Okay, I'll have to zoom out now to see what's happening. This is certainly running for a much larger number of iterations than what I had before, and as you saw, I made a very minor and trivial change to it. All I added was one more live pixel, so a very small change to the input pattern that results in a really quite different simulation here, in a really quite a different output. And as I said, it's really hard to judge this, right? So this is still going after more than 200 iterations now, and it doesn't look like it's going to get anytime soon to a stable state and stop moving, but that's also hard to tell, right? I mean, I can't just look at this and say that, oh yeah, well, this is obviously going to keep going, or this is obviously going to stop at some point soon. I'm going to stop this now. Here we go. And yeah, so hopefully you were able to have some fun with this again, and also see that even for a relatively simple system, so all we have is a grid with a bunch of live pixels and a bunch of dead pixels, and these very simple rules that determine where pixels are created and where they die, we can get really unpredictable output really, really quickly. Not for the really trivial and small input sizes in particular. Well, if you have just one live pixel, you know exactly what's going to happen. But once we get past a certain, still relatively small size, it becomes difficult to predict what's going to happen. And related to the task I gave you earlier, try to characterize what makes a good initial pattern. Is it the kind of shape? Is it the kind of pixels? Kind of difficult, right? Certainly if you have more pixels to start with, that tends to result in a more interesting pattern, but you can't really make that generalization for everything, because there could also still be cases where I have a large number of pixels, for example, that kind of spread out individually over the grid, they disappear after one iteration, right? So it's not just the number of pixels, it's also not just the shape. It kind of depends on both of these, and then also where different areas of the pixels are located and how they can potentially interact. So really quite a complex system from simple rules that we have seen at the beginning here.